Bonjour French 1, this is your section 1.1 video notes all about asking for and giving names. Remember, as you're taking your notes, you are only required to write down the words and phrases that appear on the lines with the yellow background. Those are the actual French words for these phrases. The ones that are kind of in the middle in the parentheses with the green background are not required. Those are my helpful reminders about how to pronounce these. So if you think it would help you to write those down, you can. If you don't think it's really going to help you, by all means, skip it. But do make sure you get down the yellow background phrases on the lines. Last reminder is to make sure that you're repeating after me in the pauses provided so that you get the full vocabulary experience of seeing it, hearing it, writing it, and saying it. So let's go ahead and get started. There are several ways of asking about somebody's name depending on who you are asking about. If you are asking about another male, whether they're in the classroom or somebody you were talking about, and you want to ask what is his name, the way you say that in French is comment il s'appelle. If you wanted to switch it up and ask about a girl and what is her name, you would say comment elle s'appelle. And probably the one that happens most often whenever you first meet somebody is asking what is your name. In French, that is comment tu t'appelles. So then, of course, we have to have logical responses for those questions, including the way you say his name is. In French, the way you say that is il s'appelle. And please notice that there is this ... after each of these because you actually have to fill in the person's name. Otherwise, you're just saying his name is and trailing off randomly. If you wanted to respond to that comment elle s'appelle question of what is her name by saying her name is, you say elle s'appelle. Again, followed by her actual name. And finally, if you want to say my name is, you say je m'appelle. And you follow it by your actual name. So another way that you might end up having to give somebody's name is by introducing somebody. So if you're not necessarily asking what is his name, what is her name, but instead you're introducing somebody to somebody else and saying, you know, I'm introducing you to a friend of mine or things like that. So this is more kind of along the lines of introducing somebody. So if you say something like his name is Pierre and you want to elaborate on who that person is to me, you might want to follow the il s'appelle Pierre up with the phrase he's a friend, as in it's a friend of mine. The way you would say that is c'est un ami. If, however, you are introducing a female friend of yours, maybe you'll say something like elle s'appelle Julie, her name is Julie, and you'll follow it with the designation that she's a friend of yours by saying c'est une amie. If you just want to say straight up this is, instead of his name is, her name is, and all of that jazz, you can just say ça c'est and follow it by the person's name. Now these next two are both ways of saying I'd like to introduce you to, but it brings up an important distinction between informal and formal language in the French language. And we kind of have this in the English language, but there's not designated grammar rules about it. So there's actually a separate note section towards the bottom of your page where you can jot down this information about the idea of informal versus formal language. Basically, informal language is language that you use around either people that are your own age or younger, so your peers, or if it's an adult that you know really well, usually somebody you're related to. It almost always has to be a family member or somebody that's considered to be family. So you would use informal language with a friend, with a little brother or sister, with your grandma, maybe with a really close family friend. Formal language is used around people that you're not as familiar with, especially people that are adults that you're not related to. So technically, when you speak to your teachers, you want to use formal language because it's an adult that you're not that close with. They're not like family to you exactly. If you meet somebody at the store when you're checking out and you're talking to the cashier, a cashier would be an adult that you're not necessarily related to. So just kind of keep that in mind. I know you guys realize that you talk with your friends differently than you talk with your teachers. The kind of language that you use is different, but in French, they will actually use different pronouns and different kinds of grammar concepts depending on who you are talking to. So both of these sentences mean I'd like to introduce you to, but if you're talking to a friend and you're introducing them to somebody else, you would pronounce it as je te présente. And if you're talking to an adult and you're introducing, so let's say you brought your friend into our classroom and you wanted to introduce them to me, your teacher, so you needed to speak formally, you would say, je vous présente. And if this whole formal versus informal thing is a little confusing, don't stress out. We're going to practice it a lot this year and make sure that it's clear before we move too much further. Finally, if somebody does introduce you to somebody else and they say things like, here's my friend Pierre, and you want to respond to that introduction. Now, I know nobody really says this in the English language. When they say delighted, they also mean nice to meet you. But the way you say that in French is to actually use the word enchanted, which sounds even weirder than delighted. So either way, nice to meet you or delighted is the word enchanté. And the reason why they have the E here in parentheses is because if you are a boy saying that you're happy to meet somebody, you don't put the E on there. But if you're a girl saying you're happy to meet somebody, you do add the extra E. Now in this case, it doesn't change the pronunciation. It's enchanté either way. But if you were to be writing out a conversation or writing a letter or sending a text message or something like that, and you were a girl, you would want to add this extra E. Not with the parentheses, just write it on through with the extra E. They put the parentheses there as like a little warning, like some of you might need this, but some of you might not. And I know, again, that's a weird concept, using a different kind of word based on whether you yourself are a boy or a girl. But again, that's something else that we're going to be getting used to this year. Finally, this is from a previous notes page, but of course, whenever somebody says, je vous présente Julie, c'est une amie, I'd like to introduce you to Julie, she's a friend of mine, you could just, say hi, which would be, of course, salut. So don't forget to take a moment to actually do your wrapping up section here. It's part of getting your full credit for completing your homework. Remember, you only choose one of these items. You can either ask me a question about the video if there was something that was particularly confusing. You can write a quick summary statement where you say, hey, I get this and here's what your main point of today's video was. Or if you have a critique, politely tell me how I could potentially make this video better for next year's students. Don't forget to mark it done in your Google Classroom account, and make sure that you bring this page back with you to class.